In order for there to be real, true love, there has to be the risk of degradation, of it all falling apart. We call that entropy. So true love requires real entropy.
What if reality isn't made of things, but relationships? My guest today is Dr. Douglas Hamp, and the framework he lays out challenges how we think about matter, meaning, love, entropy, and even God himself. If coherence matters more than material, if misalignment explains why systems collapse, then this conversation changes how you see everything. This is Orion Files. Let's dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Orion Files. I'm very excited. Today's guest is a returning guest, Dr. Douglas Hamp. Now, Doug has a unique way of connecting scripture, ancient language, modern science without forcing conclusions or watering anything down. Now, today we're going to explore a framework he's been developing that honestly reframes how we think about reality itself. His new book is called The Relational Universe. And the core question is, it's really kind of deceptively simple. What if the universe isn't built from things, but from relationships? So, Doug, welcome back to the Orion Files, man. Let's dive in. I guess before we get into the physics, theology, or whatever, I want to kind of start simple. Explain your thought process, kind of like the genesis of why you wrote this book. And then, of course, when you say the universe is built from relationships, not things, what do you actually mean by that?
Well, we've probably all heard that, you look at the table and you're like, the table isn't really solid. It's not really here. And clearly it is there. But when scientists start to look at matter, we get down to atoms. And first we thought, oh, it's atoms. But then we discover that those are pretty empty. And then you get down to electrons, neutrons, and then quarks and leptons, gluons, muons, and all those other weird little things. And you get down to packets of energy. But then it's like, okay, what's actually there? Einstein is on record saying that matter does not exist, and his amazing equation tells us that matter can be changed into energy and energy into matter. And so this really just brings up this crazy question of like, well, what's down there? And not to try to just go into that, but I was actually studying a whole bunch on near-death experiences, and tons of them would come back and say that everything was made of love. And I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, whatever. That sounds like some new age of Aquarius kind of stuff, But I started thinking, well, maybe they're right. I mean, because what is stuff made of, And the more I looked into it, the more I began to realize that it could be love or, relationship. It's because let's think about it. Where does energy reside? Let's take a battery. That's really easy to understand. A battery, where's the energy? I mean, we know that it has potential energy stored in chemicals, but it's not energy yet. That's just chemicals stored. It's when you attach the poles to each other through a wire that then you have a transference of energy. So where's the energy? It's in the movement between the poles. Isn't that amazing? It's the relationship between the poles is where you get the energy. So if everything is made out of energy, as far as we can kind of tell, but we can't really put our finger on where that energy is or how it comes about, it's because of relationship, right? And I just kept seeing this everywhere. I remember watching this video of a neuron, and this little neuron is just putting its little dendrils out, looking for another neuron. Because think about it, one neuron by itself, what can it do? Nothing. It's many neurons put together that now begin to network. They have a relationship. That's where the thinking comes in. That's where consciousness is going to come from. I know the consciousness is bigger, but still, there's an element that's based on the hardware, right? And so we have to have connection for anything to work. I started looking at mathematics, and I'm no mathematician, but I understand this, is that mathematics is not so much about figures and numbers, it's about relationship. It's the relationship of numbers one to another. Even you get down into string theory, and not everyone agrees on string theory, but still what we do know, or we think we probably know, or at least what I read, is that everything exists with one-dimensional little vibrating strings, whatever a one-dimensional vibrating string is, right? Who knows? But it takes a whole bunch of these things to create space and to create matter, right? So it's the relationship. Think about music. One note by itself is noise, but you have a bunch of notes together in relationship to each other, and then we start to have meaning. We start to have music. Information, one bit by itself is nothing, but many bits put together become a relationship. They become meaning. So the meaning is coming out of all these different things. The meaning is in the relationship itself. And it just started to blow my mind because I'm like, what? This is crazy. It's one of these things where you kind of stumble upon and you're like, am I crazy? Or am I actually seeing something? And I kept seeing it at every level. Doesn't matter where you are. It's the level. It's that relationship between stuff that gives rise to substance. And yeah, that blew my mind pretty much.
Well, there you go. So basically, in a nutshell, meaning requires relationship.
Yes.
And
yes.
And therefore, yeah. And you get into coherence, the idea of coherence, and like how coherence matters more than stuff. Yeah. Kind of explain that principle. I think it's similar to what you just described, but explain the idea of coherence.
Well, coherence is essentially that you have things in relationship and they're in right relationship to one another. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. We could also lean on the word alignment. So if things are aligned, it means that they're all facing the same direction. They have a similar purpose. And when we talk about something like a coherent system, it means that it is operating with the least amount of friction at the highest possible output. And that is true for humans. That is true for human organizations. That's true for machines, for engines, for animal systems. I mean, again, everything we talk about coherence. And if we think about it, when God said in the beginning, he created something and he said, and he saw that it was good. Mm-hmm. We often assign a moral value to that, like it was good versus that's somehow evil. But it's not that at all. I would suggest that we understand that as God is saying, okay, it's now in proper relationship to everything else. It's now stable. It's operating well. Like when you say that you turn on the engine, you're like, it sounds good. You're not saying that the engine is some moral being. You're just saying that it sounds the way it should. It's operating properly. It's coherent. And that's, I really think, what is going on. And so if we start to look at not only the Bible, but just the whole universe and everything therein as a structural discussion instead of a moral or emotional kind of things, it takes a lot of the bad feelings away. Here's another word for you. Take the word sin. Ooh, people freak out. What do you mean sin? I'm not into sin. Like, well, you are. And I have a really simple example to illustrate sin. When you walk with your shoes untied, is that a sin or not? People say, well, that's not a sin. Oh, yes, it is, though. Because if you walk around with your shoes untied long enough, eventually you're going to step on one of them. And what's going to happen? You're going to face plant. And your face isn't going to be so happy when it hits the pavement and you break your nose. It's a sin, not because it's morally bad. It's a sin because it's structurally bad. It is something that is going to lead to some kind of loss, some kind of death, some kind of injury, something that is going to bring decoherence to a system. And, for me, I was like, wow, this is incredible, because now we can begin to see the superstructure of everything. Everything boils down to these things. And it also helped me to see that when God wants us to do the right thing, I think a lot of us grew up with this idea that I've got to be a good boy. I've got to do the right thing. I got to make Jesus happy. And I mean, that's what I was raised with. But God is not concerned so much about me doing the right thing to please him. As a good parent, he wants me to do the right thing so that I'm happy, so that I have a life that is filled with joy, is filled with peace. And when I when I choose activities and behaviors that lead to decoherence, that lead to misalignment, well, guess what? I face the natural consequence of my choice. We instinctively know this when a child puts its hand out to touch that hot stove. We might slap the hand or do something to spare that child from the injury, from the pain, the decoherence of that choice. It seems, almost, well, juvenile when we kind of put in those terms, but then we do a lot of grown-up things that are not so smart. And we're wondering, well, why is this not working? Or why is God so mad that I'm doing? It's like, well, you're just that little child who's trying to touch the hot stove and doesn't realize what you're doing. You don't realize that you're going to bring disrepair, you're going to bring damage into whatever system we're talking about. So understanding everything as relational and structural, it changes the whole dynamic. And it's also going to lead to some other big questions, especially for those of us who are believers. We have this whole biblical story, this biblical cosmology, and how Jesus had to come and he died for us. And when we kind of take it away from this bigger system, it's not any less true, but sometimes it can become a little bit cartoonish, or it can be somewhat like, oh, that's just religious stuff. But it begins to make sense at a whole different level. Think about this. If you have a computer system and you have a faulty kernel, so what's a kernel? A kernel is the most basic code that makes the operating system work. All right. So for Microsoft, it was MS-DOS or whatever they used, right? For others, it's Linux, right? And there's a kernel in there. The kernel has to be good. If something comes in, if some kind of virus comes in, and the kernel often has enough resources to put a patch on that virus or whatever is malfunctioning. It can patch it and fix it. But if the kernel itself is corrupted, there's no way to fix the kernel from the inside. You now have this problem where you'll never have enough resources in a closed system to fix the problem. You need something from outside to be able to fix the resources. Now, we all know this instinctually. We live our lives this way, right? Our body is a closed system and it keeps wearing down. We have entropy. So what do we have to do? We have to go outside of ourselves and find other resources, whether that the resources in the terms of food, right? We have to ingest things to keep the energy going, or we have to go out and work so that we can keep the lights on and we can, all the stuff that is necessary for daily living. And so that's fine. We're borrowing energy from some other place to have what is called negative entropy, basically to infuse the system with new energy. But when we start looking at the whole universe itself, this leads to the entropy problem. And this is where many cosmologists and scientists have said that eventually, it might take billions and billions of years, but eventually the universe is going to suffer a heat death. In other words, the lights are going to go out. We're going to run out of battery power. We're going to run out of all star power. There'll be nothing left. Again, it's hard to imagine that because it's a very, very long time away, but eventually this will be a problem. Isaac Asimov, in many of his writings, especially in his latter writings, he wrote a story called The Last Question, and humanity has built this AI computer system. This was back in the 1950s when he wrote about this stuff. Pretty cool. But humanity had achieved this amazing AI, and the AI had solved all the world's problems. But then some people start wondering, okay, this is great, but what about entropy? I mean, eventually the universe is going to run out of resources. So how do we compensate for this? And so they ask the AI, and it says insufficient data, right? Insufficient data. And so they ask this for billions of years. Every so often they're like, hey, what about entropy? And the AI says insufficient data, until eventually the lights run out, humanity dies, the last star goes out. And get this, somehow this AI has become kind of godlike. And then it finally understands what's necessary. And it says, let there be light. You're like, wait a second, Isaac Asimov, you are a hardcore atheist, and your solution for how to overcome entropy is for some godlike computer to say, let there be light. Okay. Right. But this question of entropy really kept him up at night. It was something that he thought about a lot because we cannot overcome entropy. So now if we look at the universe as a whole system, we're not getting any energy from outside the system. I mean, every scientific article I've ever read, every interview I've ever heard, they're all agreed that we have an entropy problem. Entropy, things are going from a higher state to a lower state. And how do we reverse that? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Not even the greatest AI could figure that question out. So this begs the question, okay, does the biblical model have an answer for that? And as you might suspect, the answer is yes. It's, of course, it's God, it's Jesus. But why did he have to come and die? Right? This kind of begs the question. Well, there's this other thing. If you're going to have, let's say that you want to create your own virtual world, right? You have basically three different options how you can create your virtual world. You can create kind of a screensaver fish tank kind of thing where it looks really pretty. There's seeming autonomy, but everything's perfect. There's no bad decisions. And it's just great. And it's fun to just watch. You know, it's like watching a train set go around. You're like, oh, this is kind of cool. But there's no real action. And so that's one option. The other one is to create a world where only good things happen, but your beings, let's call them alpha beings, they have some autonomy. They can make choices, but they can never make a bad choice. They can only make good choices. So they're limited because yes, they can choose between good choice A and good choice B, but both of those choices were your choices ultimately. You're not letting them truly have real agency. And because they don't have real agency, because they can only say yes, they can never say no. Is that really love? I mean, think about it. Is that really love? If you have a whole virtual universe and the beings can only say yes, but they can never say no to you. And then maybe they say, oh, you're such a great creator. You're so nice. We like you. You're like, yeah, but your only option is to say yes. How do I know that you really like me? How do I know that love is true and genuine? And so the third option is to create a universe where the beings can truly say yes, but they can truly say no. And when they have the ability to say no, boy, it gives weight and purpose and meaning to that. Yes, doesn't it? Suddenly they are truly choosing. But here's the risk. When you create autonomous beings that have the potential to say no, well, they have potential to screw the whole thing up, right? Because they may not choose what is good for another. They may not choose what is good for the system as a whole. They may choose something that is only good for them, good in quotes there, that it's self-seeking instead of selfishly seeking, right? Selflessly, there's the word. Selflessly seeking. I'm trying to find that. So that's the risk. And then when you do that, if in order for there to be real, true love, there has to be the risk of degradation, the risk of it all falling apart. We call that entropy. Yeah. So true love requires real entropy. And we're living in a system where we see that every day.
You really broke all this stuff down. Great. I was just going back real quick to Coherence. If you've ever been on a row crew, rowing a boat, and you hear this, idea, where you'll have, a number of rowers, and you hear the term rowing in the same direction all the time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if you are not in sync and all rowing in the same direction, even if someone's just off slightly, man, it's amazing the difference that causes, the incoherence that it causes. Yeah. But the coherence is absolutely fascinating and beautiful. Actually, it's a beautiful thing when everyone is rowing in sync in the same direction. So that's a great illustration, like for that point of coherence. But when it gets to entropy, here you're absolutely right. And the second law of thermodynamics is clear. Things break down. It's your house gets dirty. That's why you have to dust and clean, and or your car breaks down, or I can't run like I used to run when I was younger because of arthritis. These kind of things happen, and it's just when you extrapolate that out to the universe, you're absolutely right. Eventually, by that law, that's what's supposed to happen. And eventually you just run out of band-aids or outside energy back into the system to, clean the house or, fix the car or whatever it is. So,
Right.
But it is interesting when you talk about entropy and love. Love requires it, because true love isn't knowing that someone's going to say yes. It's knowing that they could say no.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of why I everybody that watches this program knows that I love cats. I love cats because they can say no.
Yes, and they frequently do.
Yeah, and so
Yeah, dog can't say no, right?
and when a cat comes around and loves you, that wow, that's a big deal. Whereas, and I love dogs too. I love animals, period. But like, it's a little different relationship because it's just like, hey, how you doing all the time, And it's like, well, I don't know. That's a very, very interesting point. So,
Yeah.
So whenever you say meaning requires relationship, and relationship, love, requires entropy. That's a simple way of or maybe more complex way of saying, we live in this world where love relationship, whatever you want to say, is a dominating force.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that love requires entropy, but love requires the potential for entropy.
Yeah.
There's the risk of entropy. There's the risk of misalignment. Because if there's no risk of misalignment, well, then there's no real opportunity for genuine love. Right? Because then it's just programming. So that's the amazing thing. God created beings that were like him, that were in his image and his likeness. And I would dare suggest that the reason that God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden was not so that they would necessarily fumble, but so they would have a real choice. They have a real option to actually love. Because there were two real options from that tree, right? We know that they ate of the fruit and that messed everything up. However, they had the other option, which is to say, no, thank you, Satan. We're not interested in this fruit. We believe what God said. We're going to trust in what he said. And we're choosing to not eat from this tree. And I think God would have said, hey, look, man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now let him stretch out his hand and take from the tree of life and live forever. But because we chose the other option, then he safeguarded us from living forever in that misaligned state. And, I've thought about this a lot. It's like, okay, how do you, the goodness of God, the great choices that God always makes, how do you incorporate those into beings innately? I don't think you really can. You have to give them the opportunity. And I was really struck by DeepMind that Google bought some years ago, but it started in England by I forget, Habusi, I think his name is. But they started this thing, this AI called DeepMind, and the way they were training it, instead of just giving it all of the information right up front and say, here you go, everything you need, they obviously gave it, enough to get started. But then they had to go through a series of developments where it had to learn, right? So you can see on the screen it kind of a human body, and then the computer has to learn how to stand up, and it has to learn how to walk. So once it learns how to walk, then they're giving it more opportunity to learn. So they put a wall in front of it, and it has to learn how to either get around the wall or climb over the wall. They did not specifically instruct it how to do that. And what's so amazing is AlphaGo. They had it learn how to play Alpha or Go, I should say, and they did not tell it exactly how it had to do it. It just kept learning, kept playing, and kept learning, and then it eventually played the best player in the world. And they're going along, and AlphaGo came up with move 37 that no human had ever thought of. This was something that was completely creative, something that was brand new. Nobody had ever thought of it. This deep mind thought it up, right? It was creative, but they had to allow it the ability to make mistakes. They had to allow it the chance to learn and to cumulatively put all these things together. And so I think a large part of why God is allowing this world to go on as it is, and with all the pain and the sorrow and death and all the rotten things that happen that break our hearts, part of it is, this isn't the only life that we get to live. We have the incredible promise of a life hereafter. And something that I get often as a pastor, people come and they're scared stiff. They're like, oh my gosh, will I blow it in heaven? Will I make a bad choice in heaven? And so they think it's either A or B, that either God's going to take away all autonomy so that they can't make a bad choice, or if they still have autonomy, they might make a bad choice. But the whole point of this little experiment here called life is that we are learning. We're learning what it means to be free. We're learning what it means to be a free moral agent. We're learning the difference between right and wrong, between good and evil, between things that lead to alignment and things that lead to misalignment. And the child that put their hand on the stove, they're never going to do it again, right? Because now they know the cost, they know the reality, they know the pain. They're not going to make that choice again. Not in a million years would they make that choice, because it hurt, because they introduced misalignment and decoherence into their life. And they're like, why would I ever do that? I mean, it makes no sense. So in the age to come, I'm not worried at all that I'm going to make some, stupid choices, or I'm going to somehow get back into sin, because that's what this world is all about. That's what this life is all about. I think of Brewster's Millions. That was a kind of a silly movie with Richard
Pryor.
Pryor, yes, Richard Pryor. He was the last possible heir to this inheritance of $300 million. But the guy that was leaving the money thought that, Richard Pryor was a complete loser. And so, he's like, here, just take some millions and you'll be done with it. Or you gotta, blow $30 million in 30 days and then you'll get $300 million. And he was like, oh my gosh. And the whole point was to teach him how to be responsible with money, to kind of get out of his system, blowing it on stupid things, and so he learned. And then by the end of it, he was a different person, and he became a very generous person. He became a much wiser person. And then when he could actually get the full inheritance, then he had the character to go with it. Right. And, as a parent, we tell our kids, oh, this thing builds character. Right. I hated it when my parents told me that. And of course, I told my kids that. They're like, yeah, whatever. They all roll their eyes. And, God is telling us, yes, but this builds character. And what do? We roll our eyes. We're like, yeah, whatever. Can't you just give me the thing? Just help me out here. Just this one time, please. And he's like, yeah, but it builds character. And it's really true, and this goes back to the relational universe. Now, I want people to understand that. I mean, obviously, I think relationships are very important. I think God is into relationships, but I'm not just talking about relationships. I'm talking about the fundamental stuff that the universe is made of. And I'm suggesting that there is no stuff. I'm not the first guy to suggest that by any means. But what I'm suggesting is actually down there is relationship. And that's the part that truly blew my mind, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what is down there? And you're like, energy packets? But what is energy? It's the relationship between the poles. Where is electricity in our homes? Well, it's somewhere between the the power plant and here, right? And it's the movement of energy, whatever we want to call it, right? We start to run out of words to explain this very well. But, you know, I mean, I'm not ready to say that relationship is energy, but it kind of feels like it just a little bit, you know? And so when, you know, what I was saying is that I was studying all about all these near death experiences. And I mean, just dozens of them were saying that everything is made of love on the other side. And I thought that's so ridiculous. That just sounds, you know, like flower child kind of stuff. And, you know, like we're back in the 60s and 70s with the hippies, right? I'm like, everything's made of love. Like, okay. But I think it might actually be true, you know, to define exactly what love is. You know, I think relationship is probably the best word, but it's this sense that it's the exchange, it's the go between of this, you know, between the poles. That's where that connection lies. And we, as free moral agents, we are participants in this. We get to choose. We get to choose either to align or to misalign. They all have their costs, but that's kind of where we stand.
Very fascinating. Very fascinating. This gets into the topic that comes up sometimes on this particular program of consciousness, and especially with the near death experience stuff. And you know, you gotta tread tread lightly, sort of, in this realm, because everybody is fascinating, Doug. Scientists, engineers, it doesn't matter what we're talking about, from propulsion to, yeah, you name it, and it all comes back to consciousness. But I feel like there's a missing piece there. And I mean, consciousness is like the goal, you know, like, to a lot of these people, it's almost like a new religion, where it's like, I need to elevate my consciousness to a higher level and then become God. Like, I can become God, basically. And in the end of it, that's what it is. Elevate my consciousness to a higher level. But in what you're talking about, we're not really talking about that. We're talking about being in line with a relationship with, and in this relationship, if we can call it love, that is what produces all of the consciousness, I guess you would say, or everything, to a degree.
Right. Well, I mean, the Bible says that God is love. Okay. And we know that God spoke and everything came into existence. So certainly from a theological standpoint, it's pretty hard. It's pretty easy to make these jumps. The harder part, I think, is I think it's a good exercise to try to understand the universe and not always just invoke God. Well, God did it all. Like, I mean, I think he did, but how did he do it? And what are the mechanisms? And can we learn something? And instead of just saying, well, you know, God did this and that, and it gets lazy when we do that. And so I really think that God wants us to understand and to dig deep and to try to understand it. And, you know, when it comes to consciousness, nobody can quite define what consciousness is, right? It's one of those things, you're like, you try to define it, like, well, okay. And where is consciousness? It probably somewhat in our brain. I mean, certainly we have a lot of synapses that are firing and electrical pulses and all that stuff. And so there is a mechanistic aspect to it, but we all know that it's far more than just that soft tissue in our head. I mean, that's part of it, but it seems to create it somehow, but there's something far more to it. And I mean, you know, again, to try to figure out what is consciousness exactly is a little challenging. But, you know, some of these people that are looking for a higher consciousness, just kind of use their term, I think they're partly right. You know, and I think we all ultimately want to do that. I think that we kind of start off in life very just focused on the body. We're focused on appetite. We're focused on things that this body needs, that we're craving, because, well, ultimately we're kind of falling apart. And so we're running into negative, we're running into entropy. And so we need to somehow overcome that. And little babies cry because they don't know how to communicate that, hey, my tummy is hungry, my tummy's empty, and I need to put something in there. And then as we continue to grow and to learn in life, we learn how to control some of those appetites. We learn some of the appetites are great, some are not so great. Some can be filled with better things than lesser things. It's like learning how to eat well. I mean, yeah, you can put candy bars in your mouth all day, and that'll settle your stomach for a while. It'll give you energy, but it's not really the best diet for you. And that's like a lot of the things that we ingest, whether it's physical or mental or spiritual. There's things that we can ingest that fill that craving for a little while, but then we begin to realize it's actual spiritual junk food, and we need something of a greater substance.
Hey folks, always be sure to check out the aftermath for this episode only on patreon.com/Orion Files. All right, let's get back to Dr. Douglas Hamp.
And as we continue on this journey, we begin to learn some deep truths about ourselves that, if I stop caring about everyone's opinion, well, that's great. That's a higher consciousness. If I stop caring about everyone's opinion, if I can learn to detach myself just a little bit and see myself kind of, detach from myself and have another perspective, right? There's all these different things that we can learn. But ultimately, what I would suggest that people that are leaving God out of the equation is, where did everything come from? When you go to the book of Genesis, it's so amazing because it talks about, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was without form and void. Tohu vavohu in the Hebrew. The tohu vavohu, there's lots of ideas about how it should be translated, but the Hebrew is pretty simple, actually. It's something that is unformed. It's not deformed. It's not exploded. It's not something that used to be, and now it's just a bunch of nothing. Think of it like cement in a cement mixer. Inside that cement mixer is your house, right? But in its current state, it's tohu vavohu. It doesn't have form yet, but it will. It's in its cement in the cement mixer is in its most, non-formed formation at that point. And so when God was creating, he created a bunch of potentiality. And what's amazing is when you start getting into quantum physics, they talk about how, well, there's an experiment. Let me just explain this. There's an experiment called the double slit experiment. It's one that blows your mind, okay? Because they decided, well, there was this debate, what is matter? Is it a wave? What is light? Is it a wave or is it a particle? And the answer is yes. Okay, it's both. Yeah. But it depends on whether you're looking at it or not. So they did some simple experiments where they shot a single electron through two slits. And when they were not watching it, they looked at this wall, this film that was put behind it, and they saw what looked like the pattern of a wave. And they're like, well, that's interesting. So they're like, well, let's look at it. Let's see what happens. And so when they started to observe it and watch, then you had some electrons going through this slit, some going through this slit. So then it started to act like a particle. And they're like, well, that's awfully weird. And this experiment has been repeated hundreds of thousands of times. I mean, it's probably the most widely done experiment ever to try to determine what the heck is going on. How can our consciousness have anything to do with this? Well, John Wheeler, he called it the participatory universe, suggesting that our participation actually makes a difference. And what we learned from the double slit experiment is that when someone observes what's happening, it condenses it, it collapses it, or kind of cements it, if you will, into a single discrete particle instead of just a cloud of potentiality. And that's exactly what the language is expressing in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created a cloud of potentiality. Okay. And then out of that cloud of potentiality, the tohu vavohu, he calls it the earth, but then the earth was unformed. It wasn't just that you had a ball and God was like, okay, I'm going to put a mountain here and then a river there. No, he wasn't doing that. It was all of the matter that we basically call earth or eretz. That was unformed. It was potential. And then there's 7 places in Genesis 1 where we have this really important part. And it says, and God saw. And God saw. He was the first observer, right? He's the first observer to his own creation. And just like the guys looking at the double slit experiment, they're collapsing that electron from being a wave to then becoming a discrete particle. And I'm like, wow, that just blows my mind. So you already have this built-in sense of consciousness into the universe, God being the initial observer, and then he creates us in his image, in his likeness, and then we become participants. We're not the sole creator. That's where people go too far. But we become co-creators with God, co-participants with what, he's given us. He gave us all the raw material, and now we get to make stuff as well. And I mean, so that goes back to this idea that the relational universe is that we have participation in this whole thing. And I narrow it down to basically 3. I call it care or maybe air, but basically there's connection, there's alignment, intent, and repair. So I'll just look at the 3, the air. So alignment means that for any real relationship to be a cohesive relationship, there has to be obviously connection. Things have to be in some kind of relationship, right? And then you have to have alignment. Are we all kind of stacked in the same direction? Are we facing the same way? That's alignment. However, you can also have alignment without participation. In other words, without intent. Think of a policeman and a criminal. They're both handcuffed together. They're both going in the same direction. There's connection. And it looks like they're aligned because they're going in the same direction. But that as soon as those cuffs come off, that prisoner is going to run the opposite direction. So there clearly is not the same intent. There's not participation, not free participation. And as we were saying, for love to work, there has to be voluntary participation. And just thinking about that there has to be this participation in this participatory universe. I mean, like, okay, this is pretty cool stuff, So, yeah. And then the last thing is R, which is repair. The biblical word for repair is forgiveness. All right. But in any kind of relationship, there's always going to be some shift. There's going to be some entropy. There's going to be some drag. There's going to be something that, even if it starts out well, there is the introduction of misalignment. And so there has to be a mechanism, some kind of system for there to be forgiveness or repair. And think of this repair or forgiveness. It's letting go of entropy. It's letting go of built up misalignment. It's stored misalignment. That's how I would suggest it. Stored misalignment. And so when you're letting something go, you're repairing it, or you're forgiving, you're releasing that stored misalignment so that we can get back into proper alignment. And that's why, God is incredibly merciful, because he wants there to be alignment, right? So we can stop seeing God as the God of the 10 commandments and you got to do these things and God is all legalistic. No, God's like, I just want there to be alignment, guys. And I also want freedom. I want you to freely choose to love me back and to love your neighbor, but I cannot make you do it. When I first understood that principle, that God can't make me love him. He's all powerful, but he cannot make me love him. Mind blown. Wow. I'm just like, what? How can God not make me? But that's the very nature of love. You cannot make somebody love you. You can put a gun to their head and say, love me, And maybe they'll give you a kiss, maybe they'll hug you because there's a gun to their head. But the minute the gun goes away, so does the love, because it wasn't real. It was manufactured, it was forced, coerced. And that's the inherent risk of love. If there's going to be true love, not just a screensaver or a fishbowl type of universe where we're not just putting on a good show. We're always saying yes, okay. I mean, yeah, I can choose good A, I can choose good B, but I can't really say no to you, God. Oh, that's not love. That's just good. That's good programming. But in order for love to be real, for it to be meaningful, there has to be the potential of entropy, the potential for us to say, no way, Jose, not interested. And that also raises the question, well, why would God create Satan? Why didn't he just take care of Satan? Because that's how love works. Love is relational. And if love can just automatically hit the reset button, well, then it's not really love, is it? I mean, people say, well, why didn't God just take care of Satan right away? Why didn't he just fix things years and years ago? Like, well, because he wants it to be a loving relationship and not a top-down imposed relationship. So there always has to be freedom to choose. So here comes Jesus. He enters the system. He becomes one of us. He then takes on that misalignment into his own body. He then dies on the cross. It's kind of like restarting your computer, right? You shut the thing down and then you start it back up. Well, basically, Jesus came and gave us a new operating system. But as love is, it has to be freely chosen. It cannot be shoved down our throat. And that's why he doesn't demand that we come to him. He doesn't force us to come to him. He could force us, but he can't force us and still have it be loving. Those two things are mutually exclusive by their very definition. And God is love, right? So God can in no way violate that principle. I mean, I suppose he could, right? But then he wouldn't be the God of love. He would be the God of order, right? And a lot of people are very happy with the God of order. But there's another God who specializes in that. He's called Satan. He's like, I don't care what you really think about it. I'm just going to make sure things are efficient and that we get stuff done. And there's no place for debate and for love and feelings. We're just going to make it happen. You know, sometimes, well, not to get into sidetracked on the devil, but you know, everyone has their backstory, right? And Satan, I think, probably imagines himself to be the hero. You know, he imagines himself to be this champion of freedom, and he's trying to, you know, introduce better order or what, I don't know, whatever. But I think of the Silmarillion, where J.R.R. Tolkien, you know, he wrote this whole backstory to Lord of the Rings. And in there, Melkart was one of the Ainur, and you know, all the other Ainur, the angels, they were all singing in harmony, with perfect harmony with one another. And then Melkart introduced some dissonance. He brought in decoherence, and people, you know, some of the other Ainur are asking, I forget the Ilu Aluvatar, I think his name is, the creator god, like, why don't you stop him? He's like, no, I'm just going to weave in the dissonance into the song. And according to that, you know, mythos, Melkart was trying to bring order into things. He wasn't just trying to be rebellious. He was trying to do things in what he thought was a better way. And anyway, I start looking at all this and I'm like, wow, it really makes so much sense when you start to see love as structure, relationship as structure, not just do's and don'ts, not just let's try to please God and be a good person, not just I'm trying to get to heaven, so I got to do what God said to do. But it's just like, well, this is what alignment looks like. And you know, the funniest thing is that we understand this viscerally, right? We understand in our gut when things are off.
Yeah.
Let's take a love relationship, a romantic relationship. We all know what decoherence feels like. Somebody ever broken up with you? Was that a pleasant experience? No, it wasn't. It hurt, right? It's called heartache. You can feel it. You're like, oh, I want to die because things are so lousy, and or you're depressed. You're in this state of remorse. You're in a state of grief. All of that is because you are feeling that decoherence in your gut. So we understand this, and the word that we use to talk about the best coherence possible, the best alignment possible, is love. That's the word that we use. Now, unfortunately, the word love in English has fallen into all kinds of silly things. I love pizza. I love the Broncos, whatever it may be. But love is something that's far more than that. It has to do with the structural sense, and that's why I got really excited about this topic, because I was like, wow, this is cool, right? It's not just ooey gooey mushy kind of stuff, but it's structure, right?
Right.
And structure, we can see it. Yeah.
So on the opposite side of this,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious. So this is a deep dive in trying to understand relationships, love, the universe, God's creation. The idea of free choices is so imperative in the Bible. That's what was given to human beings, and we do have a free choice, like you said. We can choose to be coherent, or we can choose to not be coherent in terms of what you're talking about. But the Bible's also, it talks about consequences for not being, as you put it, coherent. In the structural thinking of what you wrote, how do you define disobedience and consequence?
Well, disobedience is ultimately when do the right thing and you choose not to do it. That's disobedience. So whether it's Satan or any one of us, we know, we've been told what proper alignment is, and either we think that we're smarter, so that's a little bit naivete, right? Or maybe we actually truly know and we just don't care. Love has to allow for us to make those choices, right? If God stopped every time we were about to make a bad decision, starting with Adam and Eve, God could have come running into the garden. No, 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 don't touch that. Well, then why put it there in the first place, right? It was there to give us the opportunity to choose. And that's how love goes, is that there has to be the opportunity to freely choose, to actually, truly make a choice. Otherwise, it doesn't have any meaning. So as much as I would like the world to be different, and I've certainly prayed a few times about that, God allows there to be dissonance. He allows for decoherence, because that's the price. That's the cost of love. That's the cost of right relationship. Is there can also be wrong relationship. Otherwise, right relationship has no meaning. Now, I suppose in the grand scheme of things, how does it all work out? I certainly don't have all the answers to that, but when I think of maybe a computer virus, it's maybe if we kind of think in the terms of the universe being a simulation, as some people have suggested, Nick Bostrom, that we're living in a simulation. Let's say that's the case. So what do you do with bad actors? Well, one option is to quarantine them. You say, okay, you can live however you want to live, but after a while, your choices are infecting everything else. And so we have to put you in a very long timeout. Maybe it's an eternal timeout. I don't know. But, what do you do with those free agents who say, yeah, I know what you want. I know what alignment looks like. I know what coherence looks like, and I still don't want it. I don't care. I'm never going to want it. In a million years, I'm not going to want it. I am choosing to do my own thing. At some point, you have to decide, okay, what do I do? This is where if you maybe own a restaurant and you can let your various patrons come in and, they can sit where they want or they can order whatever they want. But the moment that they start to create a bad experience for other people, you have to then make a choice. And that's ultimately where God has to, step in and decide how long do you let bad behavior go on. Obviously, he's allowed bad behavior to happen, so he hasn't kicked anybody out just yet. But there is a day coming, in the age to come, that's where there will be a containment. And we see that very clearly in scripture, that that Satan and all those that choose that path will be put in a very long time out. Now, whether, what that means in a billion years, I don't know. But God is going to put the bad agents, after they know the truth and they continue to reject good alignment, they're going in, a very long time out. So I guess that's the best way I can put it.
Very interesting, man. I love the fact that you went down this road, because in a weird sort of way, it's encouraging to me, especially in some of the interviews I do with people. And listen, I'm no brainiac by any stretch of the imagination, but I do appreciate an understanding that not that it goes beyond the Bible, but it just comes from a different paradigm. And I find it again and again and again, just through my faith and walk, how there's literally nothing that you can talk about, think about, or whatnot that doesn't come back to this in some way, shape, or form. And I love how you just connected the dots with, energy and the universe and the relationship that's required for something to be in motion, I guess, or whatever, however you want to explain it. But I do love the fact that you kind of connected all those dots. I appreciate it, man. How long have you been ruminating on all this? It's just like, Doug, play a little racquetball and came up with this idea.
No, most of my books are years in the making, where I'm chewing on it for a good long time, and then I finally pull the trigger and get my notes there and put into something cohesive. And I don't even think the book is done. I mean, you got an early version, and even from what I gave you, I don't know, several weeks ago to whatever that was, I've already made significant improvements. I think I'm trying to tighten it. I really want it to be something that is very focused, but it comes back to structure. And in the beginning of the book, I talk about Notre Dame. That cathedral has stood for 800 years. How did they do that? Did they just work harder? They put more sweat into this thing? No, the builders understood the principles of structure. They understood load management. And so they built accordingly, so that every stone, it's doing its job. Every stone is not doing more than it's supposed to do. It's carrying its weight, and it's in alignment, right? So it's the stones are lined up in the right sequence, and they're also participating. That means that each stone is doing its job, not more, not less. And then they also allowed for space, for these joints that can move. There's cracks in every structure. You can see it really obvious if you've ever gone across a suspension bridge. There are these kind of teeth where they move back and forth, And I remember as a kid, I went across the Mackinac Bridge in Lake, in Michigan, and I was like, "What are those things doing?" But I didn't understand at the time. But hey, things they expand, they contract, and there has to be room to breathe, basically. And that's the repair element. There has to be room to breathe. There has to be room to restore things. And those, I would argue, are the three basics for love, for any relationship. And what's so amazing about it, because it is structural, is that it applies to the grand structure of the universe. It applies to cathedrals. It applies to families, to marriages. It applies to business. It's the same structure. That's the beauty of it. It's the same structure, no matter what scale you look at it. It's the same exact structure. And here's the thing. You can't cheat. You cannot think that you're going to cut corners and get away with it. It just doesn't work that way. Those three basic things, again, alignment, intent, repair, those have to be present in every system for it to properly work, or it's going to fall apart. There's going to be something that's going to break. And, again, we know it in romantic relationships. It's heartbreak. You're like, oh, I want to die because I can't believe she broke up with me, and all this different stuff. But we also then know it economically, when ideas, just fall off a cliff because some principle wasn't followed. We see it in buildings because they collapse. There was that bridge in California. I always forget the name of it, but the one that just started to wobble so terribly.
Yeah.
That they tried. I mean, they worked hard. They did a good job, except they didn't follow the principles, right? And so it ultimately collapsed. But when you build things where things are in alignment, everything is participating as it's supposed to be, and there's opportunity for things to breathe, for repair to happen, whether that's outside repair to a bridge, whatever it may be, to internal structures. That's what's going to keep it coherent, and it applies to every relationship because the universe is relational, because it's at the very core. It's not little billiard balls that things are made up of, but it's relationship. Back in the 1800s, when they were first discovering about the atom and whatnot, they imagined that things were just made up of little marbles, little billiard balls. And that's,
Yeah.
if you could understand the billiard balls, then you could understand how everything worked. That was a very dominant position for roughly 100 years until quantum physics came in. And what's ironic is that Einstein could never get behind quantum physics. He
Yeah.
called, like quantum entanglement, he called it spooky action at a distance. It just didn't make sense. And here this guy was a genius, right? I mean, he gave us relativity, but he couldn't wrap his mind around quantum physics. That no, it's different, that nothing is actually there, and there's nothing substantive there. It's just it's a relationship, it's a probability. And so yeah, I'm really excited about this because I think it'll help us to, if you're a Christian, hopefully it will help you reframe why God does things, why God allows certain things, why God doesn't just come and fix everything already, why Jesus had to come and die and rise again, why we have to choose to put our trust in him and not just be forced upon us, why God does allow for bad actors to go on. I mean, that's one of those questions, that I wrestle with, right? I wrote this book and I still wrestle with it. Like, hey, God, I know all this stuff, but still, you're God, right? You could do something. And I'm violating my own understanding when I ask those questions. Why? Because I'm human. Because, because the pain of decoherence is real,
Mm.
and I would like for there to be a quick fix, but I'm not saying what God can't. I'm not saying that I certainly don't know everything God could do, because I'm sure he could do a lot of stuff. But from the basic principles that I'm understanding here, there's a reason, there's a method to this, what looks like madness. And, it's all going to get cleaned up in the end. That's the good news. But
Yeah. That's a good point. Another interesting point, just maybe one or two things that I've kind of gleaned from this discussion is, man, like, I'm sorry, but evolution and just these different concepts of creation. When you start getting into the nitty gritty, like you're doing, there's no randomness in this. There's purpose. There's intent.
yeah,
And it's kind of striking whenever you start going down these thought experiments about all this stuff, that it's like, yeah, there's no way it just randomly came together out of nothing, which in and of itself is the opposite of entropy, which we were talking about. And how crazy awesome is it to have a God that's all powerful, and yet in a weird sort of way, it's almost risked not being loved by giving us free choice.
right.
And
Yeah.
that's powerful.
Yeah. I think we tend to flatten a lot of those verses, God is love, and we're like, oh, that's nice. And we think God is kind of a Hallmark movie, that he's just a big fat Santa Claus and ho, ho, ho. I mean, I suppose there's that side to him, but if love is structural, it's not simply an emotion. I think that's where I know in my life, I was flattening love to an emotion.
Right.
And you think, okay, he's about emotion. Well, yeah, partly. But what I discovered is that when you have the right structure, when you have coherence, proper alignment, you have the intent and participation where it's supposed to be. You know what comes out of that is beauty.
Hmm.
Beauty comes out of that. And that thing that we feel in our gut, that visceral feeling of love and puppy love and all that other stuff, those are chemical, psychological, physiological markers of alignment.
Hmm.
It's a feeling of coherence within a relationship, and just the opposite. When the relationship breaks down for whatever reason, we begin to feel the opposite. And so we start to feel depression, we feel heartbreak, we feel anger, bitterness. And those are structural signs that something is off.
Hmm.
So yeah, God is love, but not in the ooey gooey kind of sense, but it's about right relationship, proper structure, coherence, all of that taken together. In that sense, God is love. And it's like, wow. Oh, I had you this big, God, but you're like, a gazillion times bigger, and still bigger than that, bigger than I can imagine. And so out of that essence, the God of love created. And then he created us to be in his image and likeness so that we can also experience that and we can participate in it. Right? We're not just observers of God's creation, but we're participants in it. And our decisions have a real impact on this world. And now my decisions don't change everything in this world, but my decisions have micro effects in this world, and they can be cumulative, and given the right position and power, they can become even bigger in sometimes not so great ways. But that's the thing, is that God has allowed us to be full participants, and we can make good choices or we can make bad choices. We can lean toward alignment and coherence, or we can go toward misalignment and decoherence. And ultimately, yeah, people around us suffer too, but ultimately we are the ones that are
Yeah.
bringing those things upon ourselves.
Yeah, for sure,
And
man.
and it helps me to understand that I'm not trying to be a good person or any of that stuff to please God so much anymore. I mean, maybe some part of me still is, because I'm just, old habits are hard to break, but I now understand that I want to live in alignment with this world, with my kids, with my cat, with my car, with my society, with my body, with the things I ingest. I want to be in alignment, because then I get to enjoy the peace and the joy out of that internal alignment, those signals that are telling me you're in alignment, this is good, right? And so the joy and the peace are natural byproducts
Hmm.
of proper alignment. And distrust, heartbreak, bitterness, sadness, depression, those are also natural side effects or outcomes of misalignment, right? So it's not so much that God is punishing per se, but God is simply saying, okay, you want to touch a hot stove? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
welcome to do it.
Yeah. Man. Really makes yeah. I'm gonna be thinking about this for a second because yeah, just like seeking alignment and how that could change your life. Even I mean, I don't even really like saying this, but just it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. If you're seeking alignment in your life, things are probably going to be better for you. But
Yeah.
one final nerdy question.
Yes. Yeah.
This just literally came to my mind, and I just wanted to get your thoughts and ideas about this. The Bible says in the end times, the restrainer will be taken away. And whenever you look at this universe where kind of the opposite of God is entropy, um, and there have been moments and times where God has put more energy back into the system to help fix it. Jesus Christ is a good example of that. Probably one of the biggest ones. But when the restrainer's taken away, it feels like in this context of what you wrote, maybe God's not going to be there to put energy back into the system for the healing or the recovery, and entropy is allowed to just run rampant as it would.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good way to put it. It talks about the covenant of death in Isaiah 28:14. It says, "Woe to you, scornful men who rule this people who are in Jerusalem, for you say we've made a covenant with death, Brit Mavet, and with Sheol, or the grave, we are in alignment."
Hmm.
And they do this because they say that when the overflowing scourge comes our way, it won't affect us. So there's a legal contract that inhabitants of the earth are going to enter into. And in Second Thessalonians chapter 2, where it talks about the restrainer, it says that there will be an apostasy.
Hmm.
Now that's been translated in different ways, but at the heart of it, it goes back to biblos apostasion, which is a divorce certificate. So the apostasy, or the falling away, in 2 verse 3 there, the falling away, some people say it's the rapture. It's not the rapture. It's the falling away. It's the apostasy, or there's a break of a relationship, a divorce that's going to happen on an epic scale. And Daniel tells us a clue in Daniel chapter 12. He says that in the last days, Michael, the chief prince who watches over your people, will stand up, and then there will be a time of great tribulation, unlike anything the world's ever seen. So you put those three things together, and you get a pretty scary picture. Basically, the world, including the modern state of Israel, are going to make a covenant with death and with Sheol. We see this in the fourth horseman, right? And I saw the fourth horseman, and whose name was Death, and Hades followed him. Hades and Sheol are the same exact thing. They're the same thing. And so the world as a whole is going to make a covenant with death, thinking it's a great option. And it probably won't say this is the covenant of death. I think that's Bible speak for you're making a really bad choice right now. And so they're going to make a choice. Ultimately, they're going to choose Satan. That's kind of the bottom line here. They're going to choose Satan over God. And it's not so much that God's getting kicked out, but Michael, the one who's been standing watch over the people, he's the restrainer. He's taken out of the way, not forcefully, but legally. He's basically given the pink slip. Sorry, you don't work here anymore. We found a different sheriff. Thank you. And he's shown the door, and then the world gets what it wants. We wanted death. We wanted this bad option. And so they're going to choose for entropy. Ultimately, that's what they're choosing. They're choosing death instead of life. They're choosing, things running down instead of things going up. Instead of energy being fed into it, now it's draining. Now we're running on batteries. Yeah. And we know what happens with batteries. They run out, right? I mean, they always run out of battery. That's the problem. So, a battery is great. Your phone can last for hours, but then eventually you did a little flashing light. Sorry, it's about to go. And that's kind of what the world's going to choose. They're going to unplug from the source, in this case, the protection they're getting from Michael, who has been standing against Satan, just doing a wholesale takeover of planet Earth. I mean, I know the world seems pretty lousy, and it is in many cases, but still, it could be worse. Where if that entropic tendency, the death principle, were not kept in check, it could be a whole heck of a lot worse. And that's what the Bible tells us. It's going to be a whole heck of a lot worse, because eventually the world's going to say, you know what? We think we're just going to go all in on Mr. Death here. And we think he has a better package. And God's like, well, okay,
Yeah.
But thankfully there's a happy ending to all that, but a lot of pain in the meantime.
Yeah. And it goes back to that free choice. Wow. This book, I have a feeling once the final version comes out, I'm excited to read it, but I'm also, I mean, my mind's going right now just into 1,000 different directions of how everything you just said connects with just the most mundane, simplest things in everyday life. which is kind of in a weird sort of way, super beautiful. It is.
Man, it is.
Tell people, I know that it's pre-order right now. You can get the book pre-order. Tell them how they can get that pre-ordered so that when you're finally done putting all that crazy stuff inside that head of yours down on ink to paper, how they can get it.
So it's going to be on Amazon. It's coming out September 15th. It's currently on pre-order, so you can get the Kindle version. Well, you can pre-order the Kindle version, but September 15th is when it's coming out. I'm very excited about it, and I hope people are just blessed by it and find it equally mind-blowing as I have, and obviously you, because it changes your whole perspective on how the world works, Yeah. So check that out. The Relational Universe, Why Relationship Not Matter Comes First, and you can find it on my author page on Amazon.
Okay. And website, all that stuff, so people can follow you more?
Yeah, douglashamp.com, where you can also find me. If they're in the Denver area, please do join us. We have the Way Congregation. We meet in Lakewood. So just check us out at thewaycongregation.com, and love for people to come say hello.
Awesome, man. Are you going to only have the book on Kindle? Will it be in print? It'll
be in print. I'll have a hard copy, and I'll have an audiobook as well.
Are you going to do the narration?
I will.
That's awesome. You got a good voice for that, man. I love whenever authors do their own narration. For some reason, it just, every once in a while you get a really good voice actor that can, really take it home. But man, I love hearing the author actually say it, because there's certain emphasis and whatnot that you sometimes just doesn't translate in reading that you're getting from the author. So I love that. So brother, I appreciate you so much. This has been mind-blowing. Folks, get the book on pre-order right now, and certainly connect with Doug, man. Awesome human being. I'm sure sometime down the road we'll have you back, just because I love talking to you and always learn something. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Douglas Hamp. Thank you. If there's one takeaway from this conversation, it's this: when systems lose alignment, whether in physics, relationships, or belief, they break down. After the episode wraps, I always record an aftermath. Sometimes it's technical, sometimes reflective, sometimes just pulling back the curtain on how these conversations happen. Those conversations live at patreon.com/The Ryan Files. Check it out. You folks are awesome. Be amazing, be positive, and stay curious out there, my friends. And I'll see you next time right here on The Ryan Files.
Are you not curious?
Preparing to transfer the Ryan Files. Now.
I present to you, with great intrigue and wonder, the Ryan Files.